Good evening. Welcome to B-Bus channel's English section. I'm Imtiaz Patel Varediawala. I'm one of the hosts of the English section program. B-Bus is brought to you by the Community Media Centre Bolton, UK. And as name suggests, that it is a channel for communication, it is a channel for conversation and also interaction for the community members. B-Bus belongs to all of us. It is about our voice, it is about our communication, and it is about our conversation with each other. So welcome to this program called In Conversation With, where we invite community members, community activists, people with education and academic experiences, knowledge, wise people, and people belong to different sections who come to our studio and they talk about a particular subjects. We actually have a debate, discussions, questions and answers, and try to focus on certain subjects, but at the same time try to come up with a positive solutions which may be useful to all of us on an individual levels or maybe as a collectively on a community level. And as I said, that having an interviews with people of different background is one of the key aspects of this program. Today, in our studio, our learned guest is Mussurut Zia. We would like to welcome her on behalf of B-Bus team and also on behalf of our viewers and listeners. Mussurut Zia is a community activist with a specific focus on empowering women. She works hard for community cohesion and also for community building. She has been working for Lancashire Constabulary within the Hate Crime and Diversity Unit as well. She has been working on a project for disadvantaged women and children. She has also been working, or I should say, that she has been instrumental in raising the issues around forced marriage and honor killings. She has been writing papers and articles which has been utilized by House of Lords or by the House of Lords, various charities, various newspapers and various medias as well. She has been working with BBC in making documentaries called Honor Kills. She has trained more than 2,000 professionals on forced marriage and honor-based violence. She is a member of numerous organizations at a local level, regional level, national and international level. She is a fellow of the Rothschild Fellowship, which brings conflicting community together. She is very passionate about equality and justice in the society. She is a trained English teacher and also she is a trained mental health trainer as well. She was awarded the inaugural Criminal Justice Award, which was presented by the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Having all this in mind, we would engage in conversation with Mussurut Zia on various subjects, which is, as I said, as a community activist, her background working for Lancashire Constabulary, her background working with various charities, her background in terms of mental health, forced marriages. So, Mussurut, welcome to the studio of B-Bus.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming. Looking at your biodata, it's quite your involvement is quite wide in terms of from community activists to working for Lancashire Constabulary. Also, you write on various subjects. So my first question is, as a community activist, how do you empower women?
Empowering women is central to my very existence, I think. And empowering women is not just through education, but first and foremost, I think it's giving women that belief in themselves and giving them belief in their own existence, in their own, in Urdu we say wujud, in their own self. So it may be that some people require just the confidence to be able to make a simple phone call that they've never been able to do. But it also may mean that people have never been able to engage in conversation with other women. So it's about providing the space for them to be able to do that. It could be something as simple as a coffee morning. It could be more specific, where there is certain training taking place, empowerment training, confidence building, the freedom program training, for instance. Lots of different aspects, but I certainly do try to look at the woman as a whole and not just one aspect of her being that needs to be developed, but rather to develop all the facets of her identity.
And why do you think that empowering women particularly is important? And do you work just only within the South Asian community, or do you work generally where there is a process of empowerment is required?
Well, first of all, women are the backbone of our society, of any society, not just a society. So if we have a weak backbone, we are going to have a weak society, a weak community. So therefore it's essential that our women are empowered, that they're developed, that they're confident, that they participate in every aspect of their lives. I don't work just with South Asian women, although my focus is with South Asian women, because there is a need. The need is there, and it's a stronger need at the moment. But my work involves working with all women who may need development, who may need training, who may need support. And not just women, strange as it may sound, but in order to develop women, we have to work with men as well. So we work with men from all backgrounds, all races, all nationalities, from people who are academics to people who are community activists. So really, it's a very holistic approach in terms of developing the woman.
Okay. So your experience working with the mainstream society, if I may call it that way, and also working within the South Asian community, do you think there is an imbalance in terms of empowering women when it comes to the mainstream, or inverted comma, the Western society and South Asian society?
Yes, there is. I think there is generally an imbalance anyway, because funding is being cut all the time. So this affects all the empowerment activities that women would participate in, because they tend to be in the third sector. So that has an impact. Also, I think mainstream organisations, with the best will in the world, many of them are very understanding, have developed in leaps and bounds, they've come a long way. But there are still many issues that South Asian women in particular face that mainstream organisations may not be able to take on board fully. Hence, the service that they provide is not suitable, it's not fully equipped to be able to deal with the needs of those women. So we've still got work to do there.
Okay. Now, when I was going through your biodata and your work history, I just picked up this thing that you have managed a project for disadvantaged women and children. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? How do you mean by disadvantaged women and children, and what was that project about?
Yeah, the project was based in the Rosendale Valley, a beautiful part of England, and it was to, as it says, to help and support disadvantaged women and children, not necessarily their children, but children from that community. And the project ran many things. First and foremost, it had nursery provision from 2 to 5 year old, and all of this was free. All of this was free to the service users. Alongside the needs of the children, and we were looking at children who were maybe coming from homes that had drug and alcohol misuse. Also, there were other forms of abuse that were taking place, so really distressed children. And alongside that, we had women, and the women predominantly came from the South Asian communities, Bangladeshi community, the Pakistani Patel community, who are resident in that local area. And the needs varied from something as maybe the need for English language classes, and this was predating the requirements for visas and indefinite leave to remain. This was prior to that. But there was still a need for the language. And then, along with other things, like people wanted to be able to develop their capacity for work and employment, so workshops and things around that to be able to develop them in that aspect of their life that they wished. Underneath all of that, of course, we also have issues around domestic abuse and around other types of abuse, both of the women and children, that was going on. So that work was much more subtle. but it was still ongoing underneath all of this that was going on in terms of the service provision. So I managed that for 5 years and enjoyed it very much.
Right. So I'm sure that you must have had many stories of what we call the inspirational, in terms of
Many.
where they were before they joined your
Many.
project, and then obviously the outcome at the end of the project.
Yes, many. And some of the women are still in touch with me today. And that is, I think that gives credence to my work, it gives credibility to what I do. There's one woman in particular who comes to mind straight away, whose husband for many years was very abusive. But his abuse was not so much physical as it was mental. He would not have anything to do with her. He wouldn't speak to her. He wouldn't eat the food that she cooked. He wouldn't go anywhere with her. And she couldn't understand why. And a very beautiful lady, physically, mentally, full of laughter. But also part of the cruelty that he had towards her. He wouldn't apply for her indefinite leave to remain. She didn't have a passport, so she couldn't travel to see her family. So effectively she was an overstay, she was illegal. So we worked with the Home Office to overcome that, got her indefinite leave to remain, then we submitted an application for her passport, got her passport, and then her very first trip to visit her family in Pakistan, arranged that. And she always says to me, "You're not my friend, you're my sister. I didn't know you existed, but God led me to you." And it's things like that make it worthwhile.
Sure.
And she's gone on now, and she has a small business that she runs herself in dressmaking and design, and she's happy.
Well, it's an achievement because I mean, as we say that you can't change the world, but if you can make the difference, or if you can make a little bit of difference,
Just one corner.
then I think it gives the great sense of satisfaction.
Definitely, and I think if we realise that her world did change, my world maybe didn't, but her world did change.
As a result of the training and her involvement
with the project.
With the project, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Your experiences, if I may put it that way, working with the Lancashire Constabulary.
Yes.
I believe that with the notes which you provided, that I picked up that you were appointed to kind of eliminate negative stereotypes and myths on both sides, which is on the police side as well as on the community side.
Yes.
And I'm sure that our viewers and listeners would be very curious that what sort of negative stereotypes and myths exist on both sides when we talk about police and the community. Can you share that with us, please?
I think my time with Lancashire Constabulary, I enjoyed it very much. I think I was able to do some very good work. I came away satisfied in the knowledge that I've done some good work. In answer to your question, negative stereotypes I think exist on both sides because people in our communities relate to the police in the way that maybe their parents, grandparents, their community and society in the country that they originate relate to the police. So there is this perception that the police are corrupt, they don't take you seriously, they will never work for you. And of course in this country what we also have is that the police are racist, so you can't trust them. And of course we know that there is good and bad in every community, and that includes the police community. So not all of the police personnel that exist are racist, and not all of them are corrupt. There are good people everywhere, and I think that's important to remember. Equally, what we have on the police side is not so much the stereotypes, but the perceptions or the misinformed perceptions that people had in terms of how they can relate to maybe South Asian women, how they can relate to a Muslim, telling the difference between a Hindu and a Muslim, and what the differences are, and how important it is for them to know these. Simple things like names, people's names, how you can't get those wrong because this is highly insulting. And especially if people have an Islamic name or a religious name, then surely you can't do that. One of the things that comes to mind is, why do women have different surnames to their husbands? So this was one of the things that I did in cultural training, where we talked a little bit about why it's not imperative for a Muslim woman to change her name, so she keeps her father's name, but her girls and her children will have their father's name. It had its funny moments, it had some very serious times, but some very funny moments, and one of the things that is coming to mind I acted as an internal point of reference for colleagues as well as doing external work. And one day one of my colleagues came and said, I don't know if you could help me with this name, but I did a stop and search yesterday, and 3 young men in a car who were stopped, and one of them gave his name as Alu Gobi. And he said, I've searched the system and I can't find him. And I said, well, you can continue to search because you won't find him. But it's an example of how much there is still to learn, and also how, sometimes our young men can be quite mischievous.
Yes, yeah.
So
with good intention, bad intention?
Well, I think it's not malicious.
Okay.
It's not malicious. I think it's more a case of what can I get away with. So.
But is this true, or do you reckon that there's a substance in terms of the perception, rather than about the community, about the police, that when it comes to South Asian community and when it comes to the treatment for the Muslim community, have you experienced within your professional life and your kind of services, or have you had any experiences where you thought, I think there is some substance that there's a little bit of biased views when it comes to South Asian and when it comes to Muslims and the police relations?
I think in my early days, no, because I was appointed just after the disorder that happened in Burnley. I was appointed prior to that, but the disorder happened before I took up the post. So I think I witnessed a lot of good work that was going on around social cohesion, around community building and community integration. Further on, after 2000, after 9/11, I suppose, there was a tangible shift, and that came about both internally within the police organisation and externally as well within communities. And there were certain parts of police work that I was involved in that required me to talk to people from my own community about terrorism and about counter-terrorism and reporting to the police and so on. And it was at that point where I felt that this was being a little bit unfair. It was a little bit biased, because you're asking people now to come forward without support of any kind, but to come forward and speak to the police and say, I think there's something wrong here, I want to talk to you about maybe my neighbour, my son, my brother. But there was no thought given to the support that that person may need or that family may need. And indeed, I raised the question about my own parents. And I said, you want me to do this work, I'm perfectly willing to do the work. However, my parents live in this community. How are you going to be able to protect them and support them? Because there is bound to be a community backlash. And all I was told at the time was, we'll deal with that when we get to it. So I think it wasn't thought through enough. And of course we've seen that that's just gone on and on and on now. And the perception that the community have of the police in light of recent events is far more negative, I think, than it's ever been.
Right. Because you went on to work for Lancashire Constabulary with the different branch, which we call the special branch.
That's right.
And you've been given the responsibility in terms of police and community engagement.
Mm.
So what was that about, and how did you achieve that police and community engagement in terms of bridging the gap, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was to try and bring an understanding about the two different parts of the community, if you will, the local community and the police. So it was acting as an advocate, attending on behalf of the police various events that were taking place, arranging events, providing clarification on whatever, it may be stop and search, it may be that there was a counter-terrorism event that was going on. And it was really to be visible and to be approachable so that people externally also had a point of contact that they could relate to. And it wasn't always easy, because I think, I'm sure you can imagine, on the inside I was one of them, and on the outside I was one of them. So often it became quite lonely. But I do think that I did some very good work in terms of creating that understanding, and certainly in laying the foundations, and for other people to be able to build on that.
How did community perceive inverted comma? Don't take me wrong, but I say this in a very positive spirit, and through Bieber's channel, I think that is one of the spirit we enjoy in terms of transparent, open, and quite, I would say, a balanced view. But the term I'm using is inverted comma. How did community perceive you as a kind of, a South Asian women officer working for Lancashire Constabulary, coming to us and talking about, again, negative stereotype removing, myths removing, encouraging them to engage more with police and bridging the gap?
It was difficult, and certainly in communities in the sort of East Lancashire area where they are very traditional and very insular. There were many occasions where I went to events or meetings and I was the only woman, and the only South Asian stroke Muslim woman. Where I drew strength is, first of all, I had to make sure that I knew what I was talking about and not to sacrifice my own principles. And the principles were always based on equality and justice. And that was both ways. So if I felt something was wrong internally within the police service, it didn't bother me to say it. I would say it, and regardless of who I was saying it. Of course, you have to be careful how you say it. But even with the Chief Constable, I would go and I would say, I don't believe that this is right. I believe it should be done in this way. I think we should try this, and so on. And the same the other way, the police are here to help you as well. They're not just a law enforcement agency, they're also supporting you. But they can only support if you bring your issues forward. So over a period of time, it took, I would say, probably between 18 months to 2 years to get the trust from the community. And also, I think, internally, because my colleagues were watching to see what I would do. And it did take some time to get that trust. But once I did, then some wonderful work that took place.
Sure, that's good, yeah. You can also enjoy your coffee.
Thank you.
The next question I would like to ask you on behalf of our team and on behalf of our viewers is that your involvement in raising the awareness of forced marriage and honor killing. We are conscious, and more than us, I think you are, because you are involved, and that is one of your area of expertise. It's a very touchy subject, very sensitive, but equally we also share that sentiment that it's quite important topic, and we need to look at it and we need to examine the kind of possibilities of how to eradicate those situations. I mean, what do you do to raise awareness around forced marriage and honor killings?
Well, first of all, you have to have the conversations within your own families, within your own social circles, within your own communities and your own networks. And anything that is forced is wrong. I think that's the simple, the basics. I've had conversations, started talking about this way before it hit agendas and government became aware of it and so on. But speaking to women, speaking to men, speaking to young people, and of course making sure that you do your research and you are informed, that you have the correct details. There's no point going and fighting a battle if you don't have all the information that you need. The other thing that I think spurred me on was so many people were saying to me that Islam says it's okay to force women into marriage, and particularly women. So of course this was again something that I felt was an injustice against my faith. And I was determined that I was going to set that record straight. And again, yes, it's an abuse. It's an abuse of power, it's control, it's a form of domestic abuse, and people should be made aware of it. And sometimes I think what I found is that many parents and grandparents that I worked with were not aware that this was wrong. So they had to be taught, they had to be educated in terms of being able to see the difference between arranged and forced. And many people realise that if they don't change their behaviour in some way, or if they don't compromise with their young people in some way, they're losing their children. So we have seen a shift over the years that and I have been doing this work for about 18 years now. We have seen a shift, but sadly, every time something happens, it should not take the government, it should not take a change in the law for people to change their behaviour from something that is wrong to something that is right.
Absolutely.
So sadly, that's what's happened. But we're getting there. We're getting there.
But do you recognize, or would you enlighten us in terms of when it comes to forced marriage, when it comes to honor killing, the messages normally would go out to those society who observe these sort of practices and connect these practices with religion,
Yes.
or i.e. it could be any religion, you know, Islam or Muslims or any religion. But do you recognize that, you know, practices like this, there's a difference between cultural practice and religious practice, and I think that's where we also need to work a little bit hard in order to send these messages out to the other society, that you've got to be very careful about not mixing cultural practice with religious practices. What's your take on this?
I absolutely agree with you. This is fundamental in the training that we provide, not just for professionals, but also the training that we have in our community workshops and also for young people. Many times I ask the question, are you a cultural Muslim or are you a religious Muslim? Because Islam is very clear that any marriage that is forced is considered to be null and void. The consent of the woman is essential, it has to be obtained. And Islam also says that any marriage that is forced is considered to be null and void. So it starts, I think, with our teachers in our masajid, in our mosques. They have to be able to give that message out in a very, I suppose, straight but precise manner. They have to be able to differentiate between culture and religion. And unless we have that from our leadership, we're not going to change it very quickly. As I said, it's something that I go to great lengths to point out when I'm training people, professionals from different backgrounds, because they need to be made aware that this is not a religious practice. This is not another thing to batter Islam with. But unless they know, unless they're told, then they're not going to be able to put that into practice. So one of the things that we do say is ask your questions in this safe environment. Get rid of that stereotype that you have in terms of women being oppressed and forced into marriage in Islam, because that is cultural. It's nothing to do with the religion.
Okay. You have also written many papers, many articles. Can you tell us about what you've been writing, on what sort of subjects, and why you also decided to kind of, you know, write the articles or papers on respective subjects?
Most of my papers have been in relation to forced marriage and the abuse and violence against women. And some of those papers have been used in the House of Lords when the debate was going on for the criminalisation of forced marriage. I've also written for many faith magazines and newsletters, again on various things, but usually with the religious focus on maybe forced marriage, on abuse against women, on polygamy, for instance. Most recently, I've written a few children's stories, but I don't think you'd be interested. But most recently, I've written a report which is almost 80,000 words on the lived reality of Muslim women in light of what Sharia says and what their lived reality in the UK is. And that was an extremely interesting piece of work, which I hope to be able to use to empower, again, Muslim women in the UK. So, lots of different things. They're written for local papers and newsletters and web and so on.
So basically, you know, utilizing whatever platform you would have in
absolutely.
order to convey the positive, constructive and clear-cut messages about do's and don'ts.
About do's and don'ts and about what is topical at the time. So, for instance, recently we had the young girls going to Syria, the 3 Muslim young girls from London. So it's writing something about that, and again, distancing religion as it is from the decisions that the girls may have made, and how this is not religious force that is taking them, this is their own decision. But yes, you're right, in terms of using any platform, any media that is available to get the message out there.
I believe that BBC made one of the documentary called Honor Kills, and I also believe that you played a role in terms of connecting yourself with this documentary. Can you tell us about your role, what sort of role you played?
At the time the documentary was made, there were very few people doing the work on forced marriage and honour violence, and they asked if they could come and shadow me for, I think it was around 7 days, and also if they were able to have a little bit of filming at home with my family, what sort of family life you have, and my relationships and so on. And of course I said yes, because again, I think if you want to get the message out, it has to be done properly. And if you feel it has to be done properly, then take the responsibility. So they came and shadowed me doing the work, interviewing young girls, also at home as well, our family life and my parents. But looking again at the practices that I was trying to put into place, the policies I was writing, the struggle we were having, convincing professionals that this was a real phenomenon, not just something I was making up. And then that was aired on the BBC, but also BBC Three later on, and around the world in many countries. So it was positive. It was positive that I think they were trying to give a balanced view, rather than just the scaremongering that we see all the time.
Okay.
So yes.
Yeah. Because I mean, our channel Weavers is of course non-political, non-judgmental, and our agenda is very clear-cut. You know, we do believe in constructive and very
Yes.
positive conversation with individuals at all levels, and as long as the message goes out there in a positive way.
Yeah.
So I was going to mention that, have you watched one of the recent BBC documentary called India's Daughter, which has been made in India as a result of the kind of gang rape victim in Delhi?
That's right. Yes.
And at the moment it has become a bit controversial from the point of view of Indian government, that these kind of documentary should not be screened in India and in the world, but of course the BBC is screening the film here as well as around the world. But have you watched it?
I haven't watched it completely, but I've watched snippets of it, and I can understand both views. But I do think there's been, within the women's movement, there's been a lot of debate around the title. So why is it Daughters of India? Why are the women reduced to just that identity? And why is it not just Indian citizen? Because surely that's what she is, or what all Indian women are. I think in terms of highlighting the issue, yes, it's needed. Could it have been done differently? Possibly, yes.
You have trained more than 2,000 professionals in the area of forced marriage and honor-killing practices.
Yes.
Would you brief us about the nature and the content and the syllabus of that training?
The training is ongoing, so it's probably more than 2,000. But essentially we have 3 tiers of training, and what makes my own work unusual is that I work not just with one section, so maybe the people who are suffering, but also with community and with professionals, because again I believe that unless we approach all the different aspects, there's no point changing A if you're not going to do anything about B and C. So what we look at is supporting those who are in need, either because they've been forced or potentially could be forced, and looking at why it is that they feel that way, what help is available to them, signposting them to organisations. Maybe somebody wants to do some reconciliation, somebody wants to do some mediation, so we're able to support them through that. Legal aspects as well, like changing their name through deed poll, we're able to work with solicitors to do that. And also the fundamentals, like that they need maybe an application for a benefit, or they need to move their institute of study, and so on. With the community, I think that's probably the most difficult one. But community surgeries where people can come in, and a lot of the time people shout at me. They just shout because you should know better, you should know better. Yes, I do know better, which is why I'm willing to be shouted at, because things need to change. But we take the community surgeries to the community. So in the masjid, in the community centre, women's coffee mornings, wherever there is something happening during the month of Varediawala with the milads, yes. Wherever it's needed, we go and we talk to them, all around the country. And then thirdly, with professionals, because first of all, as you mentioned earlier, they need to understand that this is cultural, and even more than that, they need to understand that this doesn't happen in every single South Asian household. This happens in a minority. However, it's significant and we need to do something about it. So it's equipping them with the skills and the knowledge to be able to, first of all, identify what is happening, and then to be able to support not just the victim, but a holistic, again, support for the community as well.
Thank you. At the same time, you are quite passionate about equality and justice. Again, what sort of work do you do, and how do you achieve equality and justice? It's a big
It's
area.
huge. It's huge. Equality and justice, I think, is everybody's responsibility. So do unto others as you would have done unto you. Some of the work that I'm involved in is around teaching, so that's one thing. I think it isn't just about equality and justice for women. There are many different aspects of our community that need to be addressed. Mental health, so being able to provide information, being able to provide support, being able to provide training. Looking at papers, looking at policies and laws that are already in existence, and maybe campaigning and lobbying for changes in those existing laws because they don't suit the purpose, they're not fit for purpose for everybody. Also working with the voluntary sector, domestic violence organisations, other community organisations, and it may be that I have skills and expertise in one area that I can give to them, which is absolutely at no cost to them, but will help them to develop their own organisation and the service that they provide, which will then in turn improve the existence and the lives of their service users.
Right. And can you tell us about your involvement on bringing together individuals from, very interesting word, conflicting communities? I mean, what do you mean by, conflicting community, and I think we would be quite interested to know about, bringing individuals from this conflicting community. I noticed that you believe quite passionately about, fostering an environment of tolerance, fostering or creating an environment of harmony, creating an environment of positiveness and friendliness, living our dispute, whatever those disputes may be on the side, but we must work on a common ground in achieving, as you mentioned, friendship and prosperity for everybody. So what was that? Is it a project or is it a...
It came about, many people will have heard of the Rothschild Foundation and the Rothschild family, and this is something that Ariane de Rothschild came up with, and she wanted to bring together people from Muslim, Jewish and people of no faith together. It was a very stringent application with telephone interviews, then interviews at Cambridge University. And then it was a programme of work that looked at social entrepreneurship for a start. How do you make your community better? And the whole community, not just your little bit, but the whole community. It brought together people from the UK, from France and from the US, and of course Muslims and Jews and people of no faith. And during that work we had to discuss our ideas in terms of social entrepreneurship, what we can give back, but also what we can take as well. But of course we had to discuss Palestine and Israel. And that became, as you can imagine, very emotive, because we had the two quite distinct groups in the room. But it was very well managed. And we were able to then understand that the conflict is there. It's not going to go away tomorrow. However, am I going to stop speaking to every single Jewish person because I blame them? Or am I going to try and work with them to create that harmony and to create that understanding that this is an issue for both sides? It's not just one against the other. I'm against the conflict, I'm not against the person, the everyday person. They are just as much a victim as maybe I am, or as maybe my friend is. And it's looking at ways that we can do that. And we're still continuing to do that. So this programme of work took place between Cambridge and Columbia University, in Columbia in New York, and then also Essex Business School in Paris. And we're now known as Fellows of the Rothschild Institute, and many of us are still in touch. We still collaborate, we work on things together. So you could have one of my Jewish friends in America working on a very similar project to what I'm working on here, but we cross-pollinate, if you will, so that we're able to give best to our communities.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Bebas in Conversation with Mussurut Zia. The interview is nearly towards the end of it, but I still have got one or two interesting questions for Mussurut. You have won, as a result of all this work which you have done, is this award called, just excuse my pronunciation, Inaugural Criminal Justice Award.
Yes.
What is this award and what's the significance of this award?
The award inaugural was the first, so it was the first Criminal Justice Award that was brought about by the Ministry of Justice, and it was presented by Tony Blair, and it was in recognition of the work that particularly I had done around community cohesion and forced marriage. And it was a very interesting day because we were invited to Downing Street, and I went along, presented with the award by Tony Blair, and then had lunch with him and so on. And I think in terms of politics it didn't mean anything, but in terms of recognition and giving credibility to my work, then it means that yes, not so much for me because I believe in it, but I can present that to other people and say our work is being recognised and it is taken seriously by the powers that be. So maybe we need to look at it a little bit more closely.
No, of course, I think it's good to be recognised. If people are working in the community, out and about, for a good cause, one of the things we also promote from Bebas is to recognise those people, recognise their commitment, recognise their achievement, and highlighting their achievement and recognition to a wider community, and basically it's setting a good example. So we would like to congratulate you for that achievement.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Mussurut, that with all your experience working as a community activist, empowering women through local projects, national projects, international projects, having won this very prestigious award from the former respected Prime Minister, Mr. Tony Blair, your experience working with Lancashire Constabulary, and more than anything, your passion about raising awareness about forced marriage and killing honor. What sort of message you would like to give us to our viewers, and particularly those viewers who are living in countries like South Asia, India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, where unfortunately, very unfortunately, for whatever reasons, incidences of this nature are slightly higher than the Western world.
Yes.
So what would you like to say to them? How we can create more empowerment process, not only for women, but for everybody?
I think what we have to say is, first of all, perpetrators are men and women, not just the men. Recognise women as being a necessary part of your community and recognise them for the strengths they have and the skills they have, and those skills are very necessary for your existence. Empower your women through education, through respect, through acceptance, through tolerance. Recognise them, celebrate them. And only then will we start to see a mind shift, not only here in the UK, but as you say, in our South Asian countries, particularly places like Pakistan and India, because they still have a lot of influence on British Muslims here and British Pakistanis, British Bangladeshis. So we need to have that shift both ways. And of course, if you're going from the UK, or you have the ability to influence from the UK, use that. Use that to influence your community and your society in the country that you came from, and show them through example that elevating the status of women is going to elevate the status of your whole community and your whole society.
Thank you very much. With this very positive note, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Bebas, we would like to thank Mussurut Zia for coming to our studio and sharing such a useful information. Not only that, but I think her experience and her presence has been very inspirational as well. I'm sure that you out there, our viewers and listeners, were able to digest most of the information she has shared with us. Once again, we like to thank you, Mussurut Zia, and also we would like to thank you for watching this program in conversation with me, Imtiaz Patel Varediawala, from our studio. We would like to say goodbye. Look after yourself. look after those who are around you, be happy and make other people happy. Thank you.